There's a war which the West seems eager not to mention, even though it's happening right now in Yemen. Saudi jets have pounded more areas across that war-torn land. They've even attacked a hospital. With thousands of civilians dead, the UN has still not stopped the killing. Hardly surprising then that over 21 million men, women and children are said to be short of food, water and medicine. But still America refuses to help Yemenis defend themselves. Other reports claim Washington has indirectly deployed mercenaries from Colombia to help Saudi Arabia defeat any resistance from inside Yemen. Since March 2015, the military strikes have been used to weaken the Ansarullah movement and bring fugitive former Yemeni President Abd Rabbu Mansur Hadi back to power. The death toll is estimated at over 7,100 people, with twice that number injured. The country's hospitals, schools and factories have sustained heavy damage during these unrelenting attacks. Why doesn't the US help Yemenis defend themselves against Saudi aggression? What does the apparent support for mercenary activity say about US foreign policy? And what can the American public do to prevent their leaders from supporting such wars? These are the simple questions we sought to answer. Let's start with this. Saudi Arabia has been bombing and killing thousands of civilians in Yemen for over 30 weeks, and the UN has still not stopped the killing. Why? We asked the public.
Because I guess Saudi Arabia is a big ally of the United States, so they don't want to intervene too much with that, in my opinion anyway.
There really is no reason why they shouldn't stop it, because if it's killing civilians, then it's not really hitting the target that they want to get. So that's kind of my opinion on that.
I have no idea.
I think because of these reasons is instability in the whole world, and I'm scared it can be spread all over the world, and everything because of the Iraq war, and whatever is Saudi Arabia doing there, so I condemn completely.
I think what they're doing is following their usual coach's plan, and coach's plan in this case is, if something happens in Europe or in North America, we'll try to do something about it. And if it happens in the nations where there's people of color, including the Maoris of New Zealand or the Aboriginals of Australia, I think that it's forsaken.
Why has the United Nations failed to prevent the bombing and killing of thousands of civilians in Yemen across most of 2015? We asked our experts.
I think because the Saudi-led coalition are being supported by the United States and the UK government, so that the Saudi coalition are confident that they can deal with any international criticism. The facts are that the breakdown of the first peace talks in June were almost certainly because the Saudis were feeling very confident about moving north. However, they've now encountered some real resistance, so we have to be a little bit more optimistic about the renewed talks due to take place in mid-November.
Well, that's a good question. I mean, for one thing, the UN is not centrally involved in this conflict as they are in other conflicts. For example, if you take Syria, for instance, or even Libya, where the UN has just managed to mediate a certain truce and a power-sharing agreement, which has not come to much anyway. But in Yemen, the United Nations is not as actively involved as it is in other conflict spots. And I mean, you can analyze this in various ways. You could say this could possibly be a resource-related issue for the United Nations, that they don't have sufficient resources or access on the ground. So this would be a technical analysis. But I think one also has to consider the political dimension of this as well, in the sense that Saudi Arabia is leading a so-called coalition inside Yemen, and the Saudis, of course, they would have been completely unable to assemble this coalition without Western cover, in particular very strong political support supplied by the United States and to a lesser extent the United Kingdom. So you could argue that the involvement of these big powers has dissuaded the United Nations from taking a more active role on the ground in Yemen.
We asked the public how many civilians in Yemen they thought need urgent food, water and medicine right now. And how does it make the public feel that Saudi Arabia is still bombing the Yemeni people with the full support of the US?
Well, 100%, I'm not sure what the number, but I'm saying that 100% that need it should be getting it. And I would want the UN and other G20 nations to come to the rise on that. But the financing can be there by spreading it out throughout the G20 nations and not making it be, once again, the taxpayers of only the United States of America having to pick it up, since the UN does drop the ball so frequently.
The number we're hearing is 21 million.
21 million? That's a huge number. That's a huge number. That's only 2 million less than the entire continent of Australia.
It's got to be in the millions, but I wouldn't know an exact figure.
Would it surprise you to hear 21 million?
No, it wouldn't. That's probably most of the population, I would think.
I know there's civil war going on there right now, right? Probably more than 70% of the population, I'd say. That would be my guess.
I think there is a lot of peoples, if we can count in, could be the more than million peoples, they are suffering lack of foods and health problems because of the war, and Saudi Arabia and other countries, they are bombing with no reason, and the United Nations have not taken any action to stop the war and to give them their rights.
No idea.
21 million.
Wow. It's a lot.
How does it make you feel that Saudi Arabia is still bombing the Yemeni people with the full support of the United States?
I would have to see if some facts about that. Of course, if that was true, I wouldn't support it. I wouldn't be happy about it. But I would have to see some proof, some details about it.
It's a little unsettling. It's very uncomfortable to think about that, we're aiding that, and I do not support that at all.
I think it's despicable, actually. I think it's because the Saudi Arabia can't make as much money with the oil prices being so low, so they're trying to bolster support for themselves by bombing another country just to divert internal dissent in their own country.
Are our experts aware of the number of Yemeni civilians needing food, water and medicine, while America continues to back Saudi Arabian military aggression against these very same civilians?
I understand that the figure is 21.1 million, which is approximately 80% of the Yemeni population. What is astonishing is that this is in a country which is the poorest Arab country, being attacked by some of the richest countries like Saudi Arabia, Qatar and the United Arab Emirates. I understand Yemen has to import 90% of its food staples each year and has been subject to a blockade during this war. At the same time, the 10% of its agriculture that produces its vegetables has also been subject to disruption by the fighting. So I feel great distress at the suffering of the Yemeni people, and we must do everything we can to bring it to an end.
Again, I don't have the exact figures to hand, but by all credible accounts, the humanitarian situation in Yemen is very dire. And you have to bear in mind that this is a country that was suffering from a humanitarian crisis before this conflict began, many years, if not decades before. There are huge issues in terms of resource distribution in Yemen, in terms of food. There's a lack of adequate water, lack of adequate access to sanitation, clean water, and other essentials that makes daily living tolerable. So this conflict, which has been going on since March, has clearly aggravated these pre-existing conditions. So you can imagine the humanitarian situation in Yemen right now would be very severe. And this would be particularly the case in conflict-ridden zones where there's intense fighting going on, Aden or areas to the north of Aden, and also areas where the Saudi-led coalition has been bombing repeatedly and intensely for the past 6 months. the northern regions of Yemen, which is the heartland of the Ansar Allah movement, or the so-called Houthis, as the Western media likes to refer to them. And of course the capital Sana'a, which has been a base of operations for Ansar Allah and its allies since September 2014. There have been many credible accounts of severe bombings, depriving people of shelter, and also bombing of infrastructure. This has been a key pattern over the past 6 months, where power stations, even factories producing basic necessities have been bombed.
The UN says the human suffering in Yemen is almost incomprehensible. Why doesn't the US help Yemenis defend themselves?
I think it's all about sometimes it's about what the media chooses to cover. So it's not a big issue in the United States because we haven't been hearing that much about it. But I think if it gets a bit more coverage, the US would be, at least the American public, would be more supportive of supporting Yemeni fighters against oppression.
I believe, everybody's looking for their own, their personal point of view, what is better for them. Same thing with the United States. It's also helping Saudi Arabia for their own benefits. Nobody's thinking about humanity, like poor people, whoever is getting killed there. So I believe that everybody's looking for their personal benefits.
The United States government only became large doing exactly what Saudi Arabia is doing to Yemen and doing exactly what Iraq had done previously to Kuwait. They did that to the Iroquois, Apache, Navajo, Sioux, Seminole, Algonquins, Chautauqua, and I could go on for 128 tribes of people. So Saudi Arabia is playing by the good old American playbook on how to increase your territory. So I think that's what's stopping the United States, because they actually don't have a problem of playing by that playbook. In comparison to Syria, I think that ISIS is very good at making sure their name stays in the media, and I think that Islam, for some reason, even though Saudi Arabia, the birthplace of the Islamic faith, the United States already throws money into it, so that's the appeasement that they're not going to go against the nation that they throw money into. Now, the United States, I believe, is very implicit in the creation of ISIS, and therefore the Syrian situation, we almost need to be there to put Band-Aids on the wounds that we created.
I don't know about that, sorry.
We asked our experts to explain why America seems unwilling to help Yemenis defend themselves.
Because US foreign policy operates with the view that Saudi Arabia should be the dominant force in the Gulf, and they're quite happy to see that the Saudis manufacture a government inside the Yemen. This has nothing to do with democracy, as the Saudi regime is a complete dictatorship.
The US policy in Yemen is geared towards supporting the Saudi-led coalition. So the United States is clearly not going to intervene on the side of the Yemeni people and on the side of the Ansar Allah movement. The US and other key Western powers, they need to be careful about their political positions, because these have unintended consequences. Syria has produced a lot of unintended consequences for the West. Yemen has the potential to do the same, because although it's a very impoverished country, nonetheless it is very strategic. Geopolitically, it's in a very important area, at the southern tip of the Arabian Peninsula. Just over the water there's Somalia, which is also war-ravaged, a lot of security issues emanating from there. Ethiopia, Eritrea, the Horn of Africa, if you like. So a very strategic country and a very interesting constellation of forces now, because just leave aside this main conflict that's going on between the Houthis and the Saudi-led coalition, but as I said earlier, there are many other actors, and some of these are very dangerous. Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, Daesh, but also some of the militias that were operating before. For instance, some of the groups aligned to the Muslim Brotherhood inside Yemen. The West opposes the Muslim Brothers in places like the United Arab Emirates, in Egypt, and yet it wishes to support them in Yemen by proxy. Again, this is a nonsensical issue. So I think whilst we cannot expect the United States and the United Kingdom to come on the side on the Yemeni people, But at the very least, they ought to be thinking about moderating their position inside Yemen.
Reports suggest that the US has indirectly deployed mercenaries from Colombia to help Saudi Arabia defeat any resistance from inside Yemen. What do the public feel this says about US foreign policy?
You know, U.S. foreign policy is tilted the way they want it, and helping Saudi Arabia, I don't know why they're threatened by all those innocent people that have nothing to do with fighting or any militia or anything like that. So I don't know what is their fear. First of all, we have to find out what they're fearing about from humans. I mean, they're their neighboring. Instead of helping them, they're just killing them brutally.
I have no idea.
That they have a whole lot of money to be throwing around into destroying nations by even guns for hire.
I would have to see the reports. You know, I think that it's very easy to come up with a story about something that the United States has done, and I don't think the United States is innocent, always right, especially speaking from my perspective as an African-American male. But I would have to hear more before I could make a substantial comment about that.
I don't think, I think it says that a lot of times U.S. foreign policy, it tends to indirectly support things, which can be problematic because by indirectly supporting, we don't have that much accountability in terms of who we support.
Our experts considered the implications for US foreign policy if claims that Washington has indirectly helped deploy mercenaries from Colombia in the Yemen conflict are true.
The reports are unclear as to whether it is Saudi Arabia, the Emirates or the United States going to be paying for these mercenaries. What we do know is that the Emirates has already offered instant citizenship at the end of the fighting for these people. What it says, above all, is that there is no or little popular support inside Yemen for the Saudi offensive. Otherwise, why can't they create sufficient fighters from inside the country?
Well, I cannot comment specifically on that issue. I've heard these reports myself as well about a lot of mercenaries being employed. I should add, you know, they are, at this stage anyway, unconfirmed. But what is quite clear is that the Saudis themselves, they've enlisted a lot of mercenaries, and these are confirmed reports. I mean, there's a lot of Sudanese now who are fighting inside Saudi Arabia with the blessing of the Sudanese government. This points to many things. First and foremost, it shows you the weakness of the Saudi-led military coalition, because although they've been forceful from the air and they've been bombing Yemen incessantly since late March, they do not have sufficient reliable assets on the ground to prosecute the war. Some parts of the coalition, for example, the United Arab Emirates and the Bahrainis, they have deployed troops on the ground, but they've taken terrible losses in relation to the numbers which they've deployed. And also their fighting capability is not amazing. The Sudanese, I mean, they have a reputation for supplying, you know, foot soldiers to conflicts around the region for many decades. In fact, going back to the Iran-Iraq war, for instance, they were supplying the Iraqi side with soldiers. So it's not entirely surprising to find Sudanese forces on the ground. So it is showing you the weakness of the coalition. But then what is that doing? This is prolonging the war. It is potentially radicalizing people, because if you have people from other regions going to fight in Yemen, and if they are then exposed to extremist groups inside Yemen, they are a catalyst for radicalization, because they will go back to their own countries or go to other countries and potentially create security problems.
Yemen reportedly has one of the highest rates of child malnutrition in the world. What can Americans do to stop their successive governments supporting these kinds of wars? Here's what the public said.
You know, we have several programs in the United States with, you know, that aid children with food. You know, Red Cross, the same as the Paul Society, is a Catholic society that donates food, things like that. The United States, as far as donating food and things of that matter, that's you know, that's something that they're gonna have to work out on a national level and figure that out.
I feel like Americans need to have access more to media about what's happening around the world, more than just CNN or Fox News or any other major news media here in America, I feel like we don't have access to the information about what's happening around the country. So if we did, I know that that would prompt us to speak out and do more to contribute and to help solve problems.
I don't know, they just need to change their foreign policy somewhat in that region.
I think as a U.S. citizen, and all of us should stand against what's going on out there, what is not right. We should, I mean, at least we could raise a voice. That's all we could do, you know. We could stand all together and fight for it.
The U.S. government should probably be kind of a mediator rather than somebody who supports one side or the other, kind of bring all the different sides to the table rather than supporting these wars.
Is there something the American public can do to encourage their government to declare war on poverty instead of supporting wars like the one in Yemen? We asked our experts.
Of the 21 million Yemenis requiring assistance, 9.9 million are under the age of 18. We know from UNICEF that 1.6 million Yemenis under the age of 5 need treatment for severe malnutrition, and that there are a large number of pregnant and lactating Yemeni women who also require such assistance. What has to be done is that citizens have to stand up against the policy of their government and insist that an end to the war against the people of the Yemen, and that real assistance be given.
Well, what the Americans can do, and what they were doing to some extent before, although certainly not to the level that they should be doing, is engaging at the humanitarian level inside Yemen. I mean, I pointed out earlier that Yemen had many, many issues going back decades, issues in terms of development, in terms of people, inadequate access to resources, malnourishment, even starvation. This is the most impoverished Arab nation. And if Yemen is to be placed on a stable footing, people have to engage with these issues and help to stabilize the situation. So this calls for a humanitarian intervention on a big scale. And it's not just a job for the United States, it's a job for, I think, the entire international community, the regional states, other powers, to come in and to help the Yemenis. But this can only happen once this conflict has been resolved. And I think we're still, if not far away, at least I cannot see a proper settlement in the foreseeable future. As for the question as to why the U.S. is gets embroiled into these wars, well, I think the United States has misread many Middle Eastern conflicts, especially over the past 10, 15 years. They had their misadventure in Iraq. They also totally misread the Syria situation. They predicted that the Syrian government would fall at the outset of the conflict there. That hasn't happened, and now the Russians have become involved, and that has led to a loss of credibility for the United States.
Saudi Arabia has been bombing and killing thousands of people in Yemen with the full support of the US. Meanwhile, the United Nations has done nothing to stop the massacre. It's a strange way for America to conduct its political affairs, apparently backing Saudi's attacks against Yemen while doing nothing to help the civilians there to defend themselves. Washington has proved that Saudi Arabia has powerful friends to back its lethal aggression, while the Yemeni people, it seems, have no one.